Mhm.
Joost, as always, great to see you. Thanks for making a bit of time to come and have a chat about what you're doing. What you're doing is really timely, actually. I mean, I'm quite interested in some of the environmental stuff and the ways people are tackling the environmental problems. So what you're doing is very, very relevant and certainly interesting to me, and I'm sure interesting to other people. So let's just start this conversation with the mission. I mean, tell us about what you're trying to achieve here.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. And yeah, timely. I think we've been doing this for around 14 years, so I'm happy that indeed the situation is changing and it becomes more relevant.
Yeah,
I think the concept of creating closed loops or waste reduction is, of course, not new, but I think the fact that business is embracing it as something that they can actually use for their advantage and their customers' advantage, of course, is a bit of a change nowadays. And I think that's very much in line with our thinking, our mission, our goal. We want to make that topic that might make a lot of social or environmental sense, right? The topic of waste reduction. We want to make sure that it also is relevant for those that actually make the decisions in companies, the commercial decision makers usually, because of course we all love those that have green roles within tech brands especially. But I think it's quite known that they usually don't have the mandate to make big changes. So we've always looked at those working in sales or business development or customer support. Those roles, if they start embracing green or waste reduction or circular thinking, then we can really make a change. And that's very much how we still look at this topic, making it commercially relevant to engage in waste reduction.
sure. So let me ask you about the moment when you thought this could be a global business. We could have a global impact with what we're attempting to do. I mean, just tell us about that moment.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, there are two sides of it. On the one hand, there's the topic of electronic waste, and I think anyone that's in the industry knows that we're not doing 100% take back or recycling of electronics. So it's very clear if you just around for a few months that there's an opportunity to improve the industry. And I think for me that was even more the case as I was traveling in emerging markets seeing how extremely important those mobile devices are for people's lives. But at some point, they become unusable, they become waste. And that's when you see some pretty challenging situations, right? People extracting materials in a, let's say, less environmental way. And that happens on huge scales, you can imagine, right? Some 1.5 billion devices are being produced each year. And the collections are not that number. So it's hundreds of millions of devices that should be recycled more effectively or should be recycled at all. On the one hand, but I think it's mostly the fact that we started teaming up with those that sell electronics.
Hmm.
You can imagine the operators, the OEMs, and they all have a perspective of we want to help our customers. Sorry. Yeah, I'm just getting a call there. We want to help our customers. We want to create great products and services. We want to be, better than our competition, right? Pretty much what any company has as a goal. But then when they heard the word green or sustainable, they thought, oh, that's the opposite of what we want to achieve. We want to be competitive. We want to be exciting for our customers. And I think when we first saw that actually you can combine those two, so create a green proposition that is usable for sales, for branding, for marketing, for competitive advantages. And I think that was 2018 when Samsung used our service for the first time. Yeah, then we really saw this is something that we can scale. We can collaborate with the industry. And as a result, our service can be used to indeed do the work that we've been doing already for 14 years, which is collecting electronic waste in the global south.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm interested in two things that you mentioned there. So one thing was this idea that focusing on kind of green sustainability, recycling creates a competitive advantage. So that's one thing that's interesting. I mean, I can see the logic to that. What I think is perhaps a tougher ask is how you persuade people all around the world to buy into that. I mean, that seems to me to be quite a tough thing to achieve. I mean, what are your sort of thoughts about that?
Definitely, I think you easily refer to getting people to embrace green and circular thinking as cracking the code, right? I think any company working in the sustainability side of their industry is thinking about how do we actually collaborate with the market instead of fighting it, right? Because that's what we've been doing as sustainability folks. I used to be part of that, pure sustainability side. I think we've been doing that for 50, 60 years, right? Telling people that companies are bad and the industry is broken, that our model isn't functioning, and it's all true. But it's very much on the sitting at the side, so to say, of the game and calling out all the bad things, which doesn't really help. Maybe it makes you feel better because you
Doesn't
know you're
change
right, but it doesn't really make any change, right? So I think the only thing that we can do is try to be a little bit, well, I would say maybe empathetic, right? To put yourselves in the shoes of commercial people because they don't really want to, create pollution or destroy the planet, right? I mean, that's maybe what some NGOs would say, but that's clearly not the goal of anyone. Actually, maybe a few people here and there. But an average commercial person just wants to sell their products and services
Yeah.
and want to get a nice margin out of it. So as soon as those people that are sometimes a little bit indeed uh, overly straightforward, right? I just want to sell my products.
Sure.
But as soon as they start looking at adding green or circular as something that they can actually use to indeed reach their goals, right? To indeed make their customers happy, then we get a extremely powerful ally. And I can't, think that I'm quite sure that we can't beat the market. Right? It's just too powerful, and we can talk about changing it, but that will take another 30 years. So I think the way to do it is by using their game, using their language, collaborate with them, talk about getting customers excited. I think it gives me at least a lot more energy than telling other people that they're doing something wrong.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And the other thing I really like about that is that it's another way of saying focusing on customers, which and a business isn't a business unless it's got customers. And the best way to keep
Yeah,
customers is to engage with the things that are important to them, isn't it? So I mean,
yeah,
I totally get your logic. What
yeah.
about the other challenges involved in trying to have a global impact? Because I know that's what you're trying to do. I mean, that's one challenge. What about the other big obstacles? I mean, presumably it's a difficult thing to. I mean, logistically, there are challenges, I guess, and stuff. I mean, tell us about those other challenges.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, there's a reason why we're the only company in the world that has been doing this for the last 10 years now. And that is that it's not the most business logical thing to do, right? And just in two sentences, we help the tech industry that when they deliver devices to their customers, so they sell a phone, for example. We help them to link that phone that they deliver to one end-of-life device that my company collects. So this is our activity, right? We collect end-of-life devices, and then you can imagine if you do that on a one-for-one basis, the device that our customer delivers becomes waste neutral, if that's the term you want to use. So operationally, it means that we collect end-of-life phones, laptops, tablets, products that cannot be used anymore, actual waste. And we do this solely in the global south. So we've been collecting electronic waste in countries like Ghana, Nigeria,
Right.
Uganda,
Okay.
since 2011, just about. And there's a reason why there aren't any companies doing just that. It's difficult from a legal perspective, right? And working with the government, it's difficult to work with the informal sector because that you have to work with them. And there is no formal waste collection happening there. It's difficult to create transparency in these markets. And if you work with companies like Vodafone or Samsung, they want to know what you're actually doing and that you're doing it in a compliant way. So that's complex if you start working in countries that lack a lot of enforcement of legislation, they lack NGO presence, they lack sometimes IT infrastructure. But I think that's also why working in those markets, we can have the biggest impact,
Mm.
right? Collecting and recycling waste from a country like Nigeria, you can imagine, will have a much bigger impact in those markets, but also around the world, than increasing the collection rate in a country like Switzerland, for example. So there's a big benefit of doing more in challenging markets, but clearly it's challenging because business is different in those markets. We create great stories. We create great stories by working with our local partners already for many years now, helping them to turn this waste into income. What we, of course, get a lot of questions, especially when we work with big brands. Is this safe? Is this compliant? Is this, traceable? So that's what we've been working on the last, especially 8 years, making that very clear for them.
Sure. I mean, and how do you, I mean, as the CEO, I mean, how do you stay motivated? I mean, it's a tough gig being CEO in that situation. I mean, life's a bit of a roller coaster, isn't it? There are good days and there are less good days. I mean, how do you stay motivated and stay focused on what are really quite significant challenges? I mean, how do you do that? Talk us through that.
I think we're quite lucky to have a company where you don't have to, come together with the team and find out why are we actually doing this, right? We don't make paper clips. We collect and we fund the collection of electronic waste in the global south. So it's very clear that we have a reason and a quite valid reason to be here, right, as a company.
Yeah.
So I think that's really helpful for my team, whether they work with our local partners in Africa or they, try to get tech brands excited for a proposition, or they do customer support. All of them know that it's a really great business proposition and a very impactful story that we have. So I think that goes a long way in engaging and motivating teams. But I think for us, it's actually yeah, probably a little bit more difficult than some other companies because we have a bit of a schizophrenic setup, right? On the one hand, we have real professionals that know everything about collecting and shipping electronic waste, and as I mentioned, working with local communities, sorry, in these developing countries. But secondly, we have people that are very knowledgeable about bid processes and tender
Yeah.
processes,
Yeah.
working with resellers and the tech industry. So I think my biggest challenge is making sure that they talk to each other and understand each other. They don't do the same, so they won't have an operational link on a day-to-day basis. But being able as a commercial person to explain what we do operationally in these emerging markets goes a long way to get some of our customers, especially big brands, excited. And it's the other way around as well, right? If you struggle with a permit to ship electronic waste out of Cameroon, which is a difficult country to work, then it's helpful to see if we do this correctly, if we do this right, then that will be very valuable when we explain this story to one of our operators, for example, so that they can use it for their storytelling. So I think connecting the teams is important, showing the wins that we have, which sometimes are small, right? We work with smaller OEMs like Gigaset in Germany, but they have a different approach. They give us new information on how they engage their consumers. And we have, of course, large organizations like Vodafone that I mentioned, doing our service on a very large scale, and they show to us the awards that they win with that service, the customer feedback that they get, the stakeholders being excited. So all of that is very important to feed back into your organization, so that we don't, sit in the office and think, oh, why the hell are we doing this? We're seeing a lot of great results.
Yeah, and it must be very motivating for people. I totally get that. Were there particular things that really tested you as the CEO? I mean, you've listed a whole load of things there, which I'm sure have kept you occupied. Was there anything in particular that was really, really difficult for you as the CEO? Because I mean, it's not an easy challenge there.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we started some 12 years ago as a non-profit at the time. We've been a commercial entity since 2014, so a little bit over 10 years now. And especially when we started commercially, we thought that this business model, which we created ourselves, the concept of one for one, we didn't think of that at the time. So I think our biggest challenge was that we started off just collecting waste in emerging markets with a different approach, which is just buy the waste and sell it for the material value. You can imagine that didn't work because doing this work in Africa is extremely costly if you want to do it correctly. So our biggest challenge was to pivot into actually we're a service provider for the tech industry. And we have a service for you if you're an OEM or an operator or a leasing firm. So, changing the mindset of my team, changing the story of my company, changing our business model was, of course, a big one, but also a very exciting one because not a lot of companies get the chance, or of course, not always have to pivot their business model. But I think doing it and being successful, that was very energizing for my team.
Cool.
But on a more practical note, shipping waste out of Africa, and we've been doing this now, as I mentioned, for a long time, shipping it out of now 7 countries, is still extremely difficult. And sometimes it has taken us 2 years to get a container, especially in the beginning when we just started, 2 years to get a container that was full of electronic waste, that was ready to be recycled properly, the permission to actually export. And then at some point, your investors start asking, does this really make sense? At
Yeah.
some point, we start wondering, after 1.5 years, is this really going to happen? So getting people to see this is a long-term game. We are doing something that's being appreciated. This will be required maybe at some point. This is something that, if we're doing it right, and so not use corruption, doing it right, it will be much more valuable than taking a shortcut. And that's the type of stories that you need to
And
share.
and did that the additional time it took and the challenges, did they catch you off guard, or were you expecting it to be like that?
No, 2 years was a lot longer than we expected. Also because we've been working closely with African governments since the start. My co-founder is from the African continent, and we definitely had some experiences doing some pilots. But we found out that some of our partners that we did pilots with, previous before we actually got started, they used corruption. So they used shortcuts to get a permit. So of course they didn't tell us what we found out when we were doing it in the compliant way. And indeed, we had expected it would take around half a year. So 2 years was a lot longer than we expected.
Yeah. And how did you, I mean, you talked about some of the things that you do to keep your team motivated, but that is a really long period of time to keep people focused and motivated. I'm thinking about your team, it's a really tough challenge that because, I mean, they're sat there thinking, well, the other guys are doing it corruptly. We're trying to do it the right way, but they're getting ahead of us. I mean, how did you, I mean, that seems to me to be a really difficult thing to manage in terms of the kind of motivation and the psychology of that. I mean, what are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
Well, I think we need to create a bigger picture, right, when we explain what we do. Because if you look at the silo, our service, or the collection or the shipment of electronic waste, if you look at them in silo, there are much simpler ways to do it. For example, using corruption, or for example, just selling a credit and then saying, at some point we'll actually do it, right? We're like carbon stuff. We're saying what we sell as a service needs to be done on a very short notice and needs to be done in a compliant way. And the reason why we're making that bigger picture is because that way we can indeed get a company like Samsung, which is, you can imagine, quite a risk-averse organization,
Yeah.
or a computer center or Dustin. We can get them to look at what we do and say, hey, there are no risks here, no red flags. This is something that actually can be used today, because it's not just closing loop saying that this works, but also researchers, NGOs, governments. We can use this today without creating chaos in our business. But to show that to your internal organization, it means that even a person that works with our local partners in Africa sees we're doing this not just to collect a ship, we're doing this to excite the industry and show that this is a solid thing to do. When I talk to my salespeople, they need to understand how does actually our service work all the way down to working with an individual collector in the Accra region in Ghana. Because if they don't understand that part of our whole story, they would just maybe go to one of their customers and say, buy some credits from us and be done. So sharing the story as a company, making it big enough without creating complexity, but big enough for everyone to see we're doing this in a good way and in a way that actually the industry gets surprised that this is possible, and that goes a long way.
Yeah, I guess it's about getting people to buy into the story, isn't it? And
Yeah,
recognize how important that is, and for it to be something that they want to participate in, I guess, because it's I mean, 2 years is a long time. I
yeah,
mean, and the other thing that I know about business is that businesses always evolve. I mean, that, and partly that's because what customers need and want evolves, so businesses have to evolve. I mean, tell us about the way your business has evolved over the last 10 years or so. I mean, because you've been at this a while. In what way have things changed since you started?
yeah. So we had to create a business model from scratch, um, and this was not just a business model in a mature market. It was a business model in a non-existing market,
Yeah.
and we were working in uncharted territory, right? We were collecting waste in those markets that people are not familiar with. So there was very little for us to build on. And so what we chose actually as the let's say main driver for us to create value is what do customers currently understand? What do they appreciate? So when we talk to our customers, we won't go into detail on electronic waste problems or how we collect in Africa or the need for legislation and stuff like that. Although we are of course experts on it, we always have a very simple thinking in mind, which is if I'm selling devices, what do I currently need? Right? For example, in your Vodafone again. And then the next question is, how can closing the loop deliver on that? So if that's the question, right, how can our service be of value to our customers, which indeed, as you mentioned, is a very logical question to ask. But I think if you're in the impact industry, it's not always a very logical question to ask because in the impact industry, the question is very often, how do we maximize our impact? Or how do we make clear to everyone what our impact is? How do we make clear what the problem is, right? That's more of an NGO perspective, perhaps, but you see that a lot in the impact business as well. But because we are so focused on delivering value for our customers, what has changed in the last 10 years is our customers. They
Okay.
became aware of, hey, circularity is not just this theoretical word. They became aware that waste is something that customers, so the end customer understands. But if you offer them something on waste reduction, it does need to be very simple. So what we do is that we collaborate with our customers, again, those tech brands, with our marketing people, with our communication experts, those that are working on customer journeys, and help them see what do end customers currently understand. The average consumer doesn't know a lot when it comes to circularity. And how can we tap into that? I think one report that came out a few years ago really signals that quite clearly. 74% of customers, so consumers, that like the concept of green in the tech industry, but only 4% they are buying green. So I think that shows that our customers, right, the tech industry, has a lot of work to do to offer green in the way that their customers, the consumers, do actually buy it or do actually like it. Because right now they like green, but are not buying it. And I think that's because as an industry, we're not offering it in the right way. So what we've changed into is, and although we started that way, I think we're really there now, is a service company. We have, of course, an impact proposition, but my team is mostly on helping turn this service into a great story or a branding value or a sales USP or something that you can use in a bid. When you get that request from a customer, give me something green, right? Especially governments have those type of questions, of course, to the tech industry. And I think that's a great role to have as a green company that we are, where there for our customers to help them see that green is actually valuable.
Yeah, yeah. And no, I definitely follow the logic of that. And it's interesting the way customers perceive it. I mean, I've just changed my phone and, it felt good. I got a new phone, but also they recycled, it was Vodafone, they recycled my old phone. And you think, well, that's a good thing. I mean, I don't want to sit around with a spare phone lying around in the house particularly. So I'm glad
Yeah,
it's recycled because it's come to the end of its life.
yeah,
Um, I mean, I'm not one of these people that changes my phone every 5 minutes, but so it had come to the end of its days and it needed to be recycled, and that's a
yeah,
good thing. And I feel good about that, but I didn't go there to feel good about that. I mean, that was an outcome, which is
yeah.
quite interesting. It's interesting you sort of talk about that. The other thing that interests me is, you're in multiple countries, and doing business in, I don't know, Uganda, very different from doing business in South Africa, perhaps. I mean, how do you keep track of, what different customers want in different parts of the world, that the different parts of the world that you're in, the different markets you're in? I mean, that presumably must keep you fairly occupied.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, again, we have, let's say, two parts of our business. On the one hand, we serve the tech industry,
Yeah.
and those customers are all in the global north, right? So, US, Europe, Japan, Australia. The developed countries as they're sometimes referred to. So there, you definitely see a big difference, right?
Mm.
Using the word green is difficult in, for example, in the US. Being very customer centric is much more logical there. Whereas talking about legislation is a big thing here in Europe, much less so in, for example, Japan. Um, Clearly, how to set up contracts and partnerships differs quite a bit per region of the world. But I think overall, we work with very large organizations. Like tech brands tend to be larger. So those companies, at least as an organization, have a bit of an international profile. They understand that there's more than just their country, although not always in the US, but most of the time they understand that there's more than that. So that makes it relatively easy for us, I think, to engage, of course, tailor and tweak a little bit, but engage in a somewhat similar way with customers in those different markets because our proposition is the same. The value that we offer to them is the same. It's just that some of the reasons why they would want to use it might differ. Again, legislation versus customer behavior, versus marketing, etc.
So
Um,
so just to clarify that, what you're saying is the proposition stays the same, but the customer motivation for buying it, as it were, changes depending on their circumstances.
Yeah, or at least the focus, right? I mean, the storytelling angle will differ a bit. Indeed, the initial reasons to start talking to us might differ as well. So, for example, in the Netherlands, especially when we got started, it was all about legislation is coming, and so circularity was a big topic there. Whereas I think if you look at the UK, for example, or Germany, it's much more about storytelling and showing that you're, a nice and an attractive brand.
Yeah.
And of course, it will be different per company in those markets, but overall, I think there's a bit of a difference there. And if you look at the Nordics, for example, consumers are very much demanding, or customers are very much demanding
Yeah.
something green. So that's a big push there. But that's indeed how we serve our customers. So those that buy our one-for-one service. Then the second part indeed is how we collect those end-of-life devices. As I mentioned, our customers sell a device, and then we match that with the collection of an end-of-life device. And that end-of-life is always indeed collected in, for example, African countries. And that's indeed completely different. So my co-founder manages that. He has a local partner network, so individuals that are locally based and understand the business logic and the informal approaches applicable in their network. And so we mostly follow also their thinking and their guidelines. Because doing something that here from Europe that we think would work in Uganda, that's doomed to fail. Yeah, you really need to have a good feel of the local market and work with local partners.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, lots of people have talked about the importance of building up good relationships with partners. I mean, how do you approach that? I mean, as you've just said, building good relationships with partners really important. It's easier to say than do, though, isn't it? I mean, building partnerships can take time. It can be difficult because people want different things. And so, what's your take on, as it were, partnership building?
Yeah, I think if you look at my role, so engaging with the industry, what we have been doing for quite a while now is understanding what they currently want. I mentioned earlier as well a little bit, being customer centric. So instead of trying to push your service, and again, we do see that sometimes a little bit in our network. We talk about what is the brand ambition that you have, or the market share goal, or what are the challenges that you currently face, which is not always a logical conversation to have, right? Again, we're very often labeled as you do something on
Yeah,
waste reduction or green, so go talk to our CSR department. But because we actually have something that is interesting both for investor relations or brand building or business development, we tend to build a bit of a network in the companies that we work with, and help them see that we understand their needs. So also offering our network and our contacts, sharing some of the examples that we see in the industry with them. So always starting with so a bit of a workshop explaining all of that, because it's quite useless to approach big tech brands and telling them we have a service that you need, right? We're too small. We have a label of being about charity or impact, so they wouldn't want even to talk to us. So for us, it's extremely important to start building a recognition as a commercial partner, so that we can indeed focus a relationship not just on I have some money to spare, I will donate it to Closing Loop, because that's not at all what we do. But instead saying, I want to do an investment because I want to be more competitive. And a company like Closing Loop has one way to support that.
yeah, and it's about building that into their business model, isn't it? So it becomes a part of the way they do things. I mean, when you look back on those experiences, I mean, you built a global businesses. I mean, it's not everywhere on the planet, but it's pretty global. I mean, what have you learned from the experience of doing that?
Well, I mean, there's a part of learnings for the company and learnings from me personally.
Mm.
I think for me, it's a good development to see that we now have a team of quite independent professionals at Closing Loop. I mean, I don't really succeed as a manager, right? So don't ask me to explain what a person should do and then keep track and then help them improve. Which I think for us is a lucky situation, because it's not clear, right, what will happen. We're not in a mature market, so the path towards growth is a path of being flexible, being maybe even a little bit opportunistic. So my team needs to be quite independent and make decisions quite fast and by themselves. So I think for me, the role has much more developed into being visible externally, and sharing why are we doing this, why are we relevant for the tech industry, so that I can then talk to my colleagues about how to do this, and where to start. Because I like that role of a more US type of CEO, where you're quite external, right? You just build networks instead of the internal, more sometimes COO type of role that you have here in Europe, where you're very much trying to get everyone aligned. That's not going to work anyway for our company, but it's also something I learned is very suited for me.
And what are I mean, in terms of all the achievements that you've done, I mean, what are the things that you're most proud of?
Well, I think the bigger ones are still to come, because the reason why we started this company is we wanted to make the first facility, so a factory, sorry, that turns electronic waste into metals locally in Africa, which is quite ridiculous, but it's not there at this moment. So electronic waste cannot be turned into metals in Africa anywhere. So that will be, the cherry on the cake to make that happen, and we're getting quite close. But until then, I'm very happy to say that we're not, a typical impact company talking about problems and responsibility and legislation and, making people feel guilty enough so that they work with us. I'm quite proud of the fact that we are considered a partner by some of the big brands, as I mentioned, in the industry, which I know, and some of my team that has joined was actually quite surprised about that, is difficult to do, right? It's difficult to get large organizations to do anything different than what they've been doing all along, and especially in the topic of positive impact, right? It's very easy for them to just delegate you to the CSR department. So I'm quite excited that we've managed to at least partly crack that code. We have a lot of work to do still, but being able to really combine business value and positive impact, that's very energizing.
Yeah, no, I'm sure I can totally get that. And anything you wish you'd known at the beginning that you know now?
Well, actually, when I just started, I was in the trade-in, so this was before my company closing loop, in the trade-in and selling of used devices.
Right.
So I see all those companies, sharing enormous numbers of revenue that they've created. So I'm sometimes a little bit jealous that I didn't cling on to that idea in 2012 or so. Not to say that I would have been so successful, but I could have given it a try at least. But I think what we're doing now is unique. Sometimes it's a little bit too unique, right? So we might have benefited from focusing a little bit on just one part of improvement instead of doing and shipments for the first time and local collections for the first time and a new business model, and doing this in challenging parts of the world. So maybe not combining all of that, but because we did, we're quite a special company, and I can see my colleagues are very excited about that, as am I.
Yeah, I mean, you've bitten off a decent sized challenge there, no doubt about that, which I always think is impressive. And I mean, if you were to offer some advice for people that are just starting out on a journey like yours, what would you say?
Well, I mean, the interesting part for me was that I focused on something that I felt a bit of a connection to, right? I mean, my very first job was selling phones. And so you very often hear companies that talk about impact, that they say, I started this because I was so annoyed or I was so
Yeah,
appalled.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't have that. I think it's not, the best motivation personally. I mean, for some it might be. But for me, it was great to work on a product that I knew and I know is extremely important for the world, but this symbol of technological advancement, the mobile device, and seeing how that device in the industry has really extremely positively changed the world. Of course, there's a few downsides, but overall, extremely positive. And then trying to make that industry a little bit better. That was for me a really easy way to make sure that even though there's a lot of difficulties in my job and in my company, you still get a lot of energy because you're doing this for something that you believe in. And that's a bit of a no-brainer, but I can definitely advise don't do something that you're not personally connected to because it will be difficult to find the motivation.
Yeah, no, and I think, I mean, given the length of time that you've been doing it, I mean, motivation is a pretty critical thing, isn't it? So I totally get that. And one last question before we wind up. I mean, you've talked a lot about the journey. Tell us about some of the exciting things on the horizon, because I know you've got some interesting stuff in the pipe. I mean, tell us about a few of the things that are on the horizon that kind of motivate you, get you excited.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, the big thing for us is making the first facility a reality that will turn this waste and that's currently causing challenges in emerging markets, turning that waste into a local income. So that's a big one for us, teaming up with NGOs, the Nigerian government, and of course the industry on that. But I'm also quite excited to see that the concept of one for one, also sometimes referred to as waste compensation, right? So our service is now being considered also for other industries like textile. So we're having some talks about that because clearly we're not done yet with the IT industry. Our service is mostly used now for phones, laptops, tablets. What we've also proven it works for monitors and data server equipment, for example. So expanding that, maybe also in collaboration with companies that sell washing machines or refrigerators, I
Yeah.
think is still something that we can do and can make a big impact because electronic waste is, of course, not just mobile devices. Um, and I think the storytelling and customer engagement element is something that are pretty much just got started on. I think just in the last 2 years, we became quite knowledgeable on, exactly to the example that you just gave. You don't go to the shop to get a good feeling of handing in your phone, but when you did it, it's a good feeling afterwards.
Yeah.
So how does that psychology work, right? Why is it so difficult to convince people to be sustainable in prior to their action? Well, after that they've done it, they say, "Oh, of course, yeah, this is really good, and I'm happy I did it." So understanding that, using customer journeys and mapping of customer experiences to yeah, maybe lure people a little bit into a green journey, because I think unfortunately a lot of people, when they hear those words green or sustainable, they think complexity or lack of opportunities and not being able to do what you want. But changing that narrative, changing the paradigm of green, especially in the tech industry, by focusing on customer behavior and making just the whole concept more appealing, that's something that we're just getting started on.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting you sort of talk about that really because, having a great customer experience and then coming away thinking, well, that was really good. It made me feel good, and that's a green thing. That's the way you change people's attitudes. I think
Yeah,
you don't change it by telling them to be green. You change it by people thinking that green is a good thing to do because I've just done it and it feels good.
yeah,
I mean,
and
that's
easy
yeah,
and fun, right?
yeah.
I don't make them feel guilty. I mean, sometimes that's needed, but it's just a very small part of the market that yeah, gets triggered into action by feeling guilty.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm a great believer that if you want people to do things, make it easy for them and make them feel good about it. I mean,
Yeah,
that's be a winner. So, I mean, Juice, thanks for coming and sharing that story. I mean, what an exciting thing to be working on. Super relevant at the moment. I mean, I was looking at some of the data around the non-recycling of electronic waste and how much of progress needs to be made around that. And it's great to see somebody like you that's really starting to make a dent on what is a massive problem. So. I mean, like I say, good luck going forward. I mean, a really great thing to be doing. Um, really appreciate you taking the time out, and let's catch up again soon.
that's good. Thanks, Paul.
Cheers, Bye bye.